Today's true crime case is more recent. We are on the night of January 18th, 2023. 21-year-old Rosa Chacon was at home with her family. Rosa had lived her entire life in this same Chicago neighborhood, and it was known as Little Village. Her family knew that she liked to drink. She also dabbled in drugs, but overall, they knew she wasn't the kind of person who ever got into serious trouble. At around 10:40 p.m., Rosa told her mother that she was going to go to a party. But she didn't share any details about where the party was, who she'd be with, or when she'd be back. All she said was, "I'll be back, Mom. I got the Uber ride there and the Uber ride back." It was warm out, so Rosa actually didn't take her jacket with her. She also didn't grab her ID or any other documents. So from the sound of it, she didn't really expect to be gone for too long or to be going anywhere where she would need it. A neighbor's security camera filmed her getting into an Uber that was waiting outside and then driving away. She had a history of sometimes going too far when it came to her substance use. She would occasionally go out to a party and then she wouldn't come back home for days at a time. Rosa was always good about checking back in at home. She'd call regularly. It was something she always remembered to do. Even if she was so drunk that she was slurring her words, she would still hop on the phone to say something like, "I'm all right, don't worry about me, I'm not coming home." Rosa didn't call anyone that night, even to let them know that she'd be sleeping somewhere else. The next morning, Rosa did call home, and she told her family that she needed someone to come pick her up. But before she could explain where she was or how they'd get there, the line goes dead. It was almost like the call dropped, or maybe she just needed to suddenly hang up for some reason. And since the call had cut off so abruptly, they hadn't even had the chance to ask Rosa what was going on, where she was, or why she didn't just call an Uber like she had originally planned. Hours went by without any contact from Rosa. And then her father's birthday came and went, and Rosa didn't come home or even call him to say happy birthday. So this was a sign that something was definitely wrong. So once they'd had enough of waiting and fretting, Rosa's family finally called the police and reported her missing. Or rather, I should say that her family tried to report her missing, because the Chacons went to the police station to explain what had been going on, and the on-duty officers actually refused to help them. They said that they couldn't get involved unless a crime had been committed. So the detectives said that if anyone ever found any evidence that 21-year-old Rosa had been abducted or hurt, then they would open a file on her. So for the rest of the month, the Chacon family did everything they could to figure out what had happened to their daughter, Rosa. And here's where things get especially complicated, because tips did start flowing in. There weren't a ton, but there were a decent amount, and lots of strangers from around Chicago said that they'd seen Rosa in a bunch of different places. So obviously the family turns these tips over to the police, and they still need to verify the information and confirm that these people had actually seen Rosa and not just a similar looking young woman. And as time went on, the tips started slowing down. It was like the news cycle was moving on and people were finding other stories to pay attention to. So more weeks passed, and they felt like they had to take matters into their own hands if they wanted to find Rosa. On March 6th, about a month and a half after the disappearance, they hired a private investigation firm to look into Rosa's case. Now, the PI firm posted flyers and spread the news across social media. They managed to pull Rosa's phone records and find out exactly who she was talking to on the night she went missing. And at one point, they uncovered another key clue. Rosa had been spotted shopping at a Dollar Tree, meaning she was alive and okay. And when they convinced the store to hand over the security footage, they showed the clip to Rosa's family, but sadly, the shopping woman was not her. It was just a woman who looked like Rosa. The PIs also had a hard time working with Uber. They wanted to know more about where Rosa went on the night she disappeared. Frankly, they didn't even know if she'd actually made it to the party or if something had happened to her while she was in the Uber on her way there. Well, when they looked at her phone records, there was no sign that she actually called an Uber that night. They had security footage of her getting into a car at her house. So the detectives and Rosa's family assumed maybe someone else had called this car or Uber for her. Honestly, with a small amount of digging, they could have told the investigators where Rosa was dropped off to, but they refused to release the information without a warrant, saying it was a privacy issue. Even professional private investigators with the detective agency had limitations. But even with those limitations, thanks to all their hard work, the detectives finally found Rosa in mid-March. And sadly, the discovery wasn't good news. On March 16th, one of the detective agency staffers actually visited the Cook County morgue. And it was a complete coincidence that they were at this particular morgue on this day. They had come across a Facebook post recently about a Jane Doe whose body had been discovered in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood. And if you remember, this is the neighborhood where Rosa lived and where she possibly went missing. The deceased had been found on March 1st, and it sounded like it might fit Rosa's description. And since the morgue's employees were looking for tips about who Jane Doe might be, they agreed to let the PI come visit in person and see if they could identify her. When the detective showed a medical examiner pictures of Rosa's tattoos, the coroner confirmed that the unidentified body they had found was her. So when Rosa's body had been discovered, it was tied up and wrapped in sheets. She had been dumped, sheets and all, in an abandoned shopping cart in an alleyway. But I will say that her family still didn't believe Rosa would have been out of contact for so long if she had any say in the matter. They were convinced that someone somehow prevented her from calling home during her final days or weeks. And it's hard to say if this is true because after Rosa's autopsy was done, the medical examiner apparently wasn't able to determine a cause of death. So this was very alarming, and not just because Rosa deserved justice, but also now that the people of Chicago knew that Rosa was dead, they had begun noticing a pattern. See, in February, not long before the private eye found and identified Rosa's remains, another woman turned up dead under strikingly similar circumstances. Her name was Reina Cristina Akelseb. Reina had grown up poor in Guatemala. So Reina told her parents that she was going to move to the United States, get a job, and send the money she made back to them. Now, in late February of 2023, she celebrated her 20th birthday in her new city, surrounded by the few people that she had become close to. And then a few days later, on the 22nd, she worked another shift at her job, just like usual. And then during her walk home, she was shot in the head and dumped in an alleyway. Reina and Rosa were only found about a mile and a half apart from one another. But in the meanwhile, the police department had barely made any progress in her homicide investigation. All they'd say was that Reina's murder didn't seem to be targeted. They didn't believe she had any enemies or that she'd been killed by someone who knew her. There weren't any other clues or indications of who had done this or why, and within a few weeks, the case went cold without the police naming a single suspect or person of interest. It's not over because another young Latina woman went missing in March, just days after Rosa and Reina's bodies were found, Azrea Lomeli. And she was only 15 years old. Azrea was last seen walking home from a medical facility. And like with Reina and Rosa, her final disappearance was also in the Little Village. Now, beyond that, it's hard to say much about Azrea's case, but I do know that to this day, she has not been found. But this is 3 Latina women, all roughly around the same age, that disappeared or were killed in the same neighborhood in Chicago. Then it was enough for the people of Chicago to wonder, hey, is there a serial killer on the loose? Especially because the victims were so similar. Like I said, they were around the same age. Azrea was 15, Reina was 20, and Rosa was 21. They were all very vulnerable. Azrea had her mental health problems, Rosa had a history of substance abuse and excessive drinking, and Reina was a new immigrant who didn't know very many people. These incidents hit the community of Little Village hard. But when one activist went to the police department to complain about this apparent wave of murders and kidnappings, they accused him of exaggerating. So far as Rosa's loved ones were concerned, they felt a lot of anger towards the police at this point. It really felt like her death maybe could have been prevented if the authorities had just treated the situation with a bit more urgency. Now, at a memorial service for Rosa, her family told the press that they didn't agree with the investigators' ruling that her cause of death could couldn't be determined. And by Rosa's next birthday, in March of 2024, her case was still unsolved and still not officially classified as a homicide. And no one with any official authority is willing to say that somebody else probably killed her. It is so tragic that Rosa's family is still waiting for answers. This isn't just an unsolved case. It's a case that the police haven't even agreed to treat as a homicide yet. I hope that the more coverage Rosa's story gets, the more tips come in, and hopefully soon, she, Raina, and Azrea will finally receive justice.